President Trump saying he is now doubling the tariffs on Canadian aluminum and steel.
Canada selected a new leader for the Liberal Party. We are going to see them have a new prime minister soon. Someone who has said that he wants to continue what Justin Trudeau has been doing.
This is United States, the country with the strongest economy in the world and arguably a wealth of natural resources. Despite its wealth of resources, the United States has been importing goods from all over the world. Generally, they do this at a loss to help these economies grow. However, a new commander-in-chief has recently taken office in the United States, a businessman, and at the top of his agenda, well, that is tariffs. Now, millions of Americans are buckling under the pressure of rising inflation, while countries like Canada, China, and the EU are retaliating. Who is the one suffering? Well, it is the average US citizen. But if Trump claims tariffs are a good thing, why are so many Americans suffering? Let's unravel the Trump tariff and how it is killing the economy while tanking the stock markets. The word tariffs is thrown around quite frequently in the media. Many people listen to it, but few actually understand what it is. A tariff does not harm local producers, and it should not harm the country either. That's in theory, though, but with the globalization of the world, tariffs have become a very frustrating way of dealing with other countries. In essence, a tariff is a form of tax that is often imposed on imports from other countries. If we take a look at a country like Canada, for example, the country imports a large basket of its dairy goods from the United States. Since the US can produce these products at a much cheaper cost than Canada does, it is cheaper to buy imported dairy products than local products. This hurts the local producers. Trump claims that to protect its local market, Canada has lobbied for a 250% tariff on US dairy products. This naturally means that companies pay 250% in taxes on the products, which are then carried over to the consumer. For example, you will then be paying a higher price for imported products than you would locally, which means that the demand falls and imports of these products are greatly reduced. To entice another country to abstain from their tariffs, the US can lobby similar taxes on other products, as Trump has done with the import of lumber.
Canada has been ripping us off for years on tariffs for lumber and for dairy products. 250%, nobody ever talks about that. 250% tariff, which is taking advantage of our farmers, so that's not going to happen anymore. They'll be met with the exact same tariff unless they drop it, and that's what reciprocal means.
It should balance out the fiscus, with each country now making a profit from trading in various products. In reality, the tariffs is a great way of ensuring fair trade, but Trump has taken things too far and the media doesn't tell the full story. In layman's terms, a tariffs is lobbied on imports to drive up these prices. This means that local competitors can now produce their products much cheaper. This drives consumers to choose local, which helps the economy grow. All this sounds fair and good in an idealistic world, but unfortunately, it isn't the world we live in. So, buckle up and make sure to subscribe to our channel as we explore the impact tariffs will have on you as an American. In recent months, the United States has imposed sweeping tariffs on the global economy. It focused on countries like China, the EU, India, and even closer to home in countries like Canada and Mexico. According to Axios, about 40% of all US imports come from Canada, China, and Mexico, which means that US consumers have become so used to buying these products. Things like machinery, cars, technology, and even a few natural resources like gas are massive imports to fill the gap that local production cannot fill. Now that these tariffs have been imposed, it means that producers will no longer be able to import at the same quantity. And if they do, it will naturally become more expensive. For example, fruits like tomatoes and avocados are some of the biggest products the US imports from Mexico. With a 25% tariff on these products, it means that you will pay 25% more for these products in store. Naturally, this reduces the spending power of the average American, which leads to inflation. The same extends to Chinese manufactured machinery and other items, but it also extends to some US companies. What the media fails to mention is that many US companies like Apple have set up shop in China. This means that the products are produced in these countries under a US license. Basically, the same tariff applies to these countries, meaning you can expect to pay about 20 to 25% more just in terms of taxes when buying your next iPhone. It is also for this reason that the stock market is suffering, which you will see later in this video. Now, the main goal of President Trump is to force these companies to come back to the United States. Should they agree to do so, they will naturally be rewarded with zero tariffs and products could be sold cheaper. But this will take time to enact. But instead of countries buckling under this pressure, many are retaliating.
As the United States are applying tariffs worth $28 billion, we are responding with countermeasures worth 26 billion euros.
The announcement recently by EU President Ursula von der Leyen was in direct response to recent Trump tariffs on aluminum and steel. The EU responded by lobbying similar kinds of tariffs on a similar amount. It might seem like this will not affect you as the average American, but you will be surprised. One of the biggest imports from the United States to Europe is beverages like whiskey, or bourbon, to be more specific. Additional tariffs have been lodged on things like almonds and autocar parts as well, which will naturally decrease these imports from the US to the EU. On the surface, this doesn't seem like a problem, but it will have a major effect. It all comes down to supply and demand. When a local company doesn't have a major demand, they produce fewer products. This will naturally drive up the demand, which also balances out the cost. So, for example, Ford, who supplies autocar parts for various motor vehicles in Europe, will now have a much lower demand, which reduces production. This means the price will increase locally as well. In essence, the consumer will now pay much more, despite the product being produced locally, further contributing to the rise in inflation. But it is not only the EU who have applied reciprocal tariffs. China, Canada, Mexico, and various other countries have also lobbied for reciprocal tariffs. This means that many other products and citizens have become used to buying will now be more expensive despite being produced locally. So, how have tariffs affected the United States thus far? With the knowledge of how tariffs work both internationally and globally, it spills over into the stock market.
Investors brace for Trump's looming tariffs on auto imports. The president is expected to unveil the new duties today. By today's closing bell, the Dow dropped more than 100 points. General Motors and Stellantis each fell more than 3%.
Investors often estimate the volume of sales a company will have. These figures are generally projected, but with years of experience, they tend to be very accurate. If a company is projected to sell a lot of products, like Tesla in the financial year 2019 to 2020, a lot of people invest knowing they will get a good return. But now, the sales volume of all these export companies has dropped. Naturally, it means that revenue, and importantly, profits will also take a beating, which has forced investors to search elsewhere for these investments. However, this has repeatedly happened as well. Each time the Trump administration pauses tariffs, the markets are supposed to rebound, but they don't. Investors are unsure of whether Trump will actually go through with these tariffs or if they are merely scare tactics, making economic projections incredibly difficult. With the stock markets being so volatile, it is better not to invest. Again, the US then loses investors, with many of its backers being foreign, reducing the influx of international funds. Essentially, it creates a lot of uncertainty, which again affects the consumers at home. So, are the currently higher prices actually because of recently imposed tariffs? Well, no. It takes quite a few weeks or months or even years for the effects of this to trickle down to the consumer.
There's an increase. Yeah, there's way more increase in a lot of the products.
Now, the economy is still reeling from Bidenomics, with consumers facing the repercussions of poor economic policy. While the current egg crisis can be directly traced back to the avian bird flu, which has swept across the country, the other price increases are still from years of economic mismanagement. However, this will become even worse in the coming months if the Trump administration persists with this method of continuing to use tariffs as a bargaining tool. So, what does a Trump future look like for the average American? Well, current projections are virtually impossible to make. The world has not yet seen such an aggressive tariff move.
Tonight, American businesses bracing for uncertainty.
We have Liberation Day, as you know, on April 2nd.
President Trump saying this Wednesday he'll unveil reciprocal tariffs on a vast number of products from other countries. A tax that he said will be the same amount that other countries put on U.S. goods sold in their respective countries.
However, the United States tried a similar approach in the 1920s. To help the struggling agriculture industry, the U.S. enacted the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in 1930. This would raise tariffs on various imports by about 40%. The idea was not to punish international partners as President Trump is currently doing, but rather a way of protecting the U.S. farming industry. It essentially led to a trade war, which economists predict severely worsened the Great Depression. Moreover, these protectionism policies have also proven inadequate throughout history. It has resulted in a 25% decline in the economies of countries that have enacted these kinds of policies. Basically, it means that from history, economists can predict that not having free trade agreements would certainly harm the U.S. economy. So, the question is whether or not tariffs are a good thing. In theory, tariffs could be a good thing. If implemented slowly and correctly, it could eventually even out trade deficits with various countries. Had Trump slowly applied these tariffs over time, it would have given international markets more and more time to adjust, which would have slowly evened out those trade deficits. Unfortunately, such a bulldozer approach will directly harm the consumer with everything happening at once. Following the Bidenomics and various poorly chosen economic policies, more tariffs will continue to shock the market. The consumer and average American will bear the brunt of this over the coming months, which essentially kills off markets and can possibly lead to a recession. But what do you think of these U.S. tariffs? Will it work, or are we heading for disaster? Let us know in the comments below and make sure to like and subscribe to our channel.